Hello, welcome to my Color of Law video. So, to start off, the first question is about what a surprise. Um, I wasn't surprised by very much, um, because being a social work major, we've talked about a lot of this stuff in our classes, as well as in high school. I took a social justice class, which kind of pushed us to talk about a lot of topics that are like the color of law was, but the history was known to me, which kind of made understanding this material a little bit easier to be able to digest the other points that were made just because I've already heard about the main and the background of the issues. It helped me further understand the rest. Um, what do I know about my own community and how it segregated or integrated into my community, and what would it look like if my community was required to have its fair share? I think my community is pretty um, fairly diverse. It doesn't have very much there's economic diversity, but not very much racial diversity. Um, and the parts where it is kind of like economically unfair, it's more just renting instead of owning the home. But at least in Royal Oak, there's not very much um, lack of integration. It is pretty integrated and fair. I mean, you do have the rich part, you do have the middle class, and you do have the poor part, but it is pretty fair. There's a fair share of each of the housing. And then, well, typically expect to understand two sides of the story. Is there anything missing from the color of law that might modify its argument? Unless I missed it, I think, at least from what like my personal experience and talking to other people, it's like my dad's from up north, and those people have one side of the story, and when I tried to explain to people who like his friends or family, um, they don't want the other side of the story, or they don't want to believe that it's true, and they kind of put it all onto like it's the person's fault, which is like the story that we've been expected to hear. Kind of that was shown in the video about private sector and how it's kind of all it's all that fault and it's not the fault of the government. They just don't want to hear the other side of the story and they don't believe it's true. So I think that kind of makes it difficult to get those people to understand what is going on, and that might modify its argument. But again, I could have missed that that was mentioned. Um, so yeah, and if your community, so next now to the next question is if your community and or school are racially segregated, has this resulted in fewer interracial friendships, and what are some of the consequences of missing out? So my school is decently um, integrated. Um, when I first started going, like my high school at the start, wasn't very integrated. The other students of different backgrounds, if they were a part, like my freshman year of like my class, it's because they had been since elementary school and I've grown up with them. But then once I started to reach junior or senior year, my school became more integrated and it was more diverse. And I believe that's also due to being a school of choice. But um, I had cross racial friendships, and I thought that was eye opening. It was interesting, especially at that age, to see how different parenting styles and different choices that your friends are allowed to make or allowed to do. Like I know of a different background. My one friend, his mother was very strict on him. He wasn't allowed to do very much, or he had a lot more chores around the house, and he had a lot more responsibilities than the rest of us did. But I think there is consequences to missing out on that because then you get so hyper fixated that everyone's life is like yours when really everyone's life isn't, and everyone has different experiences and different cultures and different um, understandings of like a family dynamic and importance of other things. So there is a consequence to missing out on that. So the next thing, the next question was number 5. What is one thing you'd like to better understand about your home or community and how you came to live there? One thing I'd like to know about my community, or my like broader community, is what Detroit was like and what my neighborhood was like pre-white flight. Um, like in the peak of Detroit in the 1940s and 50s, before all the jobs left and all the people, like white flight, everyone fled to the suburbs. Well, well, I think that'd be interesting to know about. Um, just because of how different it is now and how the community looks now, and you can go to Detroit and you see the different places that used to be booming because of the automotive industry and everything that caused it to boom, and you see it now and it's either run down. And I just would like to see what Detroit was like when it was at its peak of around like 2 million residents. I think seeing that would have been very interesting, as well as what my neighborhood looked like before and after, and then what it was like for people of color trying to, if they were able to, move out of the city, what that was like for them and how that impacted them, and when my neighborhood and like my county started to become more diverse and how that occurred would be interesting to me. I was really surprised that the chief had his facts wrong. I think that that's very wrong, and that as a chief justice, you should have your understanding of the topic and how it community has been impacted. Uh, that is just absurd to me. But I think that we see this now. I don't have an exact example of if I learned history. I learned a lot of my stuff through my social justice class that I hadn't known before. And when I went home to my parents at dinner and said, "Oh, I learned this today in class," and I didn't know this, they had no idea either. But it had been things that they had directly experienced in their life. So that really surprised me. And I think now we see a lot of things coming to be like this, either just lack of understanding, like the justice, or the history is known to you or not. We either we spread the wrong history, or we don't get the history at all, or there's so many sources of history that it's hard to pick which one is what's true and what's not. Like one thing that I think of is with like Native Americans and the settlers coming over here, and like Thanksgiving, and how it was like a nice meal, and how like when we came over here they just like gave us the land, and it was just like a peaceful thing that was there was no controversy behind it. But now we know, and now it's more taught about the genocide that occurred and all the bad things that happened from that. So that's one example that I can think of when it comes to just getting the facts right and the impacts that can have on generations, and also just their thought process of an identity of what it means to be American, and just knowing those things that were done. There wasn't anything unanswered questions I have. I thought it was very insightful, and I definitely learned from it more than I'd already known before. So I think it was a great source to look at and to read, as well as watch the documentary. But I think that if also having a background of knowing some of these things, it still didn't feel repetitive. Even though I did have a background, I still learned more on top of it and helped me understand it better. So thank you and have a nice week.